Okay, the meeting come to order, and first agenda item is to approve the minutes of the last meeting. Do I hear a motion?
I make a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting.
Second?
Aye.
Okay. And I don't think we need to vote, right? Just
No, if you don't have any edits, you can approve it as it was included in the packet.
so approved. Now, the only reason we're together, other than to have some fun beforehand, is to consider policy P. And great.
Is the size okay for everyone?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So Gary, I put everything into just one Word document, so it's easy for everyone to edit. This is a copy of the entirety of policy P regarding the naming of libraries, spaces, and fixtures. This
Right.
highlighted portion is the segment I believe that you all were intending to review and potentially modify. And then there is a draft down here of a potential update as well. So I'm gonna cut this part out so that it is immediately adjacent to the potential draft version. I just wanted you to see where it lived within the body of the rest of it to start. There you go.
What's that?
So the portion that's highlighted in yellow is how the policy currently reads. Your policy right now related to the naming of new or renamed facilities in the second sentence says that it shall be named for the geographic area in which that library is located. Based on your full board discussion at your September meeting, which Sujatha and Parker, I don't believe either of you were able to attend, but you may have had a chance to look at the draft minutes. The discussion related to the potential renaming of the Patrick Henry Library, either in support of a geographic region like Vienna, or in support of a community member who had a large impact like the Carter family, spurred both yourself and Chair Engler to suggest that it might be a good idea for the policy committee to get together and see if you wanted to update the policy to make it more broad. So the draft, which is right here, is what your chairperson here, Gary, provided in advance of today's meeting for review and modifications if you choose to use it.
Are you folks comfortable with using that as a starting point, or would you like to back up and have other discussion first?
Was there any discussion of this, of any alignment between the renaming policy for the library board or for the, FCPL and FCPS or anything like that? Any other entities? Because I know that there are, obviously they have their naming and renaming policy as well. I don't know actually whether there's a board of supervisors policy regarding that, as they're dealing with things like renaming highways, renaming, I don't know. I mean, I think it should be in alignment, all of it, so that it makes it easier for us to be everybody on the same page with the same stuff.
It's an excellent question. I am not aware of a currently approved countywide naming convention or policy. There are snippets in different agencies. So the Park Authority has their own piece because they have many sites that could be named. Most other facilities and agencies are under the purview of the Board of Supervisors, which gives them a little bit more political opportunity and breadth as they renew things. And there had at one point been a countywide policy under discussion. I am not sure where it landed, and I'd be happy to follow back up on that. This discussion was not, there was no request at either the full board meeting or in advance of today's meeting to look at alignment with CPS.
I know that in the school board policy for renaming of schools that it's in their policy to not be a living person, to only be someone who's deceased, because a living person, you have yet to know how their life will end or what, and then you end up with a potential, the potentiality of a problem where something is revealed or something happens and you've gone through a great expense and the public process for someone who has not yet ended their life on earth. So that is something that we should, I think, consider. I'm not saying that I agree or disagree. I'm just saying that
Sure.
we should consider.
So while there is not a countywide policy, which again, I will go back and double check, the county has in at least 2 recent instances renamed facilities in honor of people who are still living. The Sharon Bulova, the mental health building, which is a CSB site, and the Kathy Hudgens Community Center up in the Weston area. And those women are both, the buildings were named when they were alive and they remain alive right
In the
I know
South
that I'm sorry.
South County building.
Yes,
Jerry Highland.
that's correct. Yes, thank you.
There was I don't know when they there's Colin Powell, like one of the schools is Colin Powell, I think. And that was done, some years back. But that was when they were gonna rename no, it's escaping whether it was Lanier. It might have been Lanier, which is Fairfax City, that they were considering the name of, oh, my mind is not working, the Black female astronaut whose name is now escaping me. Anyway, and they use that as the rationale, but that's actually in their policy, though I don't know if they always follow that school board, but anyway, something to consider.
May Jemison.
May Jemison. Thank you, May Jemison. Yeah, and I believe it was Lanier, and they went with something else. Oh no, it wasn't. It was Mosaic, and they went with Mosaic. It was they went with Mosaic, and it had been Mosby Woods, and they went with Mosaic. And though that was also, but here's the thing: it's also in their policy not to name a school after an area that has something else. Like Mosaic is a district, it's a shopping district, and this is not even in Mosaic, but they decided to call it Mosaic, and I think that there were a lot of political reasons for that. It turned into a whole thing. That's the thing. It turned into a whole thing, and so they have a policy against naming something that would have precluded using Mosaic, but they used Mosaic, and then they claim that they didn't use other things like May Jemison because they have something in their policy against naming someone who's currently alive. So, I think that we pick and choose. Not we do, but one does sometimes pick and choose.
Jessica, although it shouldn't drive our policy in the long run, the immediate issue that prompted it would be the Carters. Neither of whom are no longer with us, are they?
Correct. So if the intention is for the library board to consider renaming the Patrick Henry Library in Fuller Park after William and Lillian McKinley Carter, they have both since passed away.
That's what I thought.
Yes, they have both since passed away. Their family members were the ones who came and spoke at the September meeting.
So I think it's important to have the geographic area still part of the naming. So it has to, all new and renamed branch libraries have to have the geographical area. And I understand from the board meeting and talking with you, Jessica, and seeing the draft minutes that the board seems inclined to have a combination of geographic area plus the potential for a name. And I'm fine with that. I do think maybe that next sentence, any branch library may include the name of. I would suggest adding the word also, just to make it clear that it has to have the geographical name, even though the sentence before that, just so there's no confusion.
That makes a lot of sense.
I had that in my first draft, so I I think that's a great idea. Well, if we want to start then from this point, let me just mention a couple other things. There are 2 non-substantive changes that I made. You notice in the current policy, it's talking about naming a library, but in our glossary, we define branch libraries. And in practice, usually use the word library to refer to the system. So that's a minor change, but I make it. And then the other, in the current policy, we were to consult with county entities or the Board of Supervisors. And technically, that would mean that we could consult with one or the other, but not both. And so I just changed that to including. I think that's it then.
I believe so. So if you all are supportive of this updated draft language here, which would only replace the portion that is highlighted above, that we believe would allow the board, if this policy modification is approved, to rename or name new facilities in support of a geographic area, with additional support for also including the names of groups or individuals living overseas who have made significant contributions to the Fairfax County Public Library System or an individual branch library. Sujatha, you had mentioned earlier the living or deceased portion. Is that something that you wanted to talk about, including or excluding? Oh, you're muted. No, still muted.
Sorry, I don't have a lot of feelings about this. It's not like I'm really impassioned one way or the other. It's just something I know I've heard in, renaming things regarding schools. I don't know whether, I mean, you're right, they do have a combination of things. I like the idea of using geographical regions because it does end up being less controversial and, unless of course the name of the region has some kind of controversiality to it, which happens around here as well. But, we could probably, at this point in time anyway, be really conscientious about those kind of decisions anyway. I suppose a policy could take that into consideration. I don't know. I just brought it up and I don't know whether you guys want to think about it, if we want to inquire as to if there isn't an existing policy within the Board of Supervisors, then there isn't an existing policy. So we don't really.
I did a very quick phone check while we were chatting as well. I did not find one, so I'll go back through old emails after this just to see where it might have landed and follow back.
But
Yeah,
wouldn't the examples you give indicate that there is a policy, if it's not written, it exists, of using living people?
I would say that the fact that the county has been naming or renaming facilities after both deceased and living people shows that they are open to that. But I am not sure if there is any kind of documented policy that says you can do both of these things, or if there's any policy period on a county level.
No, what I'm saying, there's no formal policy, but what do you want to call it, common law or whatever? There's a de facto policy.
Yes. So common logic and examples indicates that the county is supportive of naming facilities after both living and deceased individuals. Yes.
Sujatha, you could bring it up when the full board discusses this, if you think.
Do you think it's worth discussing? I mean, I know I have a tendency to be thinking about stuff that maybe I'm the only one who's thinking about it. I don't know whether it's more than anything else, I think that it would be nice that there's some alignment, but if there isn't a policy, then there's nothing to be aligned to, but there is policy with school board. Again, like I just used in that Most People It's example, boards tend to pick and choose. You've got a policy and you like it, you use it, you don't like it, you don't use it, which is not the way policy is supposed to work anyway. So I'd like us to be if we're making a policy, I'd like us to be more scrupulous, let's say, like there's a policy and that's the policy. And if we don't want to follow that policy, then we change the policy, right? So then we don't run into those problems, especially as libraries get into more controversial issues, or people start looking at things and questioning things and asking questions and getting into to see where they can plug you up with stuff, and just
There's
That's
another
fair.
concern as well, and I've been involved in naming things in the past. And that is, the emotion of someone doing something great. And all of a sudden we want to name something after them. And they're still alive, but after time we look back and say, they really didn't reach that level. I'm not going to give you examples, but you could probably use your imagination. And so that's a second concern, I think.
That's a significant concern because there are people who are heroes in a particular time, and then as time passes and you look back on those acts with a different lens,
Right.
and it becomes like, why the heck do we have stuff named after Henry Kissinger, for example? You know what I mean? Like, why would we do that? Like at the time, So, yeah. So that's just the thing. I mean, it could be something that I think it's worth talking about. I think it maybe offers us an opportunity to safeguard our library from unnecessary questions and angst about things as they come up.
And another way to look at it is, if we took it out now, it wouldn't preclude the board from doing what it wants to do with Patrick Henry.
It would not.
And then later, if the board did want to name it after a living person, the board could do the exact thing we're doing right now. It could change its policy.
Do that.
I mean, I do think it's worthy of discussion. I mean, the same can be said for a deceased person. You could look at, you could have totally different reaction, 10 years down the road, like if you named it after a deceased person. I mean, maybe it makes sense to leave that language out, just may also include the name of a group or individual and just leave out living or deceased. I don't know. I don't feel strongly either way, but I do agree that it's worthy of a discussion.
Okay.
Jessica, in the policy,
Mhm.
Typically, like I know I've said in the past with different policies that we were with regarding materials, I mean, those policies that we were just working on, the collections, my thought was to put the library in good stead, protecting it for times when people may be making specious claims against our collection.
Mhm.
Is it worthwhile, like if taking living or deceased out, so it may also include name of a group or individual, and then that's real, or is it kicking the can down the road? So it may be named and we haven't said anything specific. Is it protective to keep it and discuss it and make a decision, or is it more protective to be more nebulous and deal with it in the future? What's the better policy?
Well, Gary's our policy expert, so I will certainly defer to him both in general context and in years of experience doing this in much higher levels. And I think that, the end product of what you're going to be doing here, if you either leave in living or deceased, or if you remove it entirely, is going to be very simple. If you leave it in, you're just being clear. Someone can read it and go, oh, I have a living relative that has done wonderful things. Maybe I could do this. You've given them a broader opportunity to utilize the policy, maybe even if it just says including the name of group or individual, because at that point they might have to come and query, or they might think to themselves as a trustee or a community member, oh, that probably doesn't include X based on my assumption of what this policy reads as. So, it's up to you two on this. If you want to be more specific so that it is entirely clear upon reading, you should probably leave it in. If you don't mind a little ambiguity, even if the end result is the same, you can take it out.
Yeah, you're right in a way. I bet if we hadn't had it in here, Sujata would have never raised the issue, and her concern would exist. I didn't know.
This is true, Gary. If I hadn't seen it there, I wouldn't even have thought of it. Actually, to be fair, I probably would have thought about it because I've done been involved in so many renaming things with schools. But if I hadn't, I probably would have.
So typically what happens with the draft policies, as you might recall, is that if this committee approves moving something forward, what goes into your full board package is a cover letter with just a brief explanation and timeline. And then you get a current copy, a clean copy of the policy, and then you get a redlined or a modified copy of the policy. And in the kind of intro cover letter, staff identify large areas that have been modified, just so it's easy for people to access and understand it. So even if someone read over the modified version or didn't notice the redlining, it would say, you know, to make more clear the differentiation about the opportunity to rename in honor of someone living or deceased, and, you know, this language removed for consideration. So hopefully it would be kind of bulleted enough in that process that folks would read it through in advance and be prepared to discuss it. Yeah, I don't know that one over the other has much staff impact. So we'll do whatever you would like on this, as we will with any other policy related to the living or deceased part.
Well, Parker, you're suggesting to leave both words out.
Yeah, because it doesn't change like the meaning if you have it in or have it out.
Right.
Kind of
Yep.
draws attention to it, but I mean, that's fine too. And I think it is, you know, as we, you know, if there's a proposal to change the name of a branch, then this issue may come up, and maybe this board should have a discussion and make a decision. I don't feel strongly either way. I totally get the point that Sujatha raises, which is, you know, somebody who's living, you know, 5 years later, they may do something terribly wrong in the community, and you would then have to potentially change the name back. Somebody who's deceased, it's less likely that you would find out something that you didn't know about at the time. So I get both sides of it. I understand both sides of it. But it may make sense for the entire board to have a discussion about it.
Jessica, that part of this was your idea, and I assume that the reason you had it in there is to make it consistent with the rest of the policy with respect to rooms and so forth.
Correct.
Yeah.
The the third sentence is a fairly verbatim copy over from the section of your policy which speaks about the naming of a library fixture or piece of furniture in the library or on library grounds, which talks about, you know, significant contributions. This one also does say living deceased.
So the question would become, if we're going to change it with respect to the building, we probably should revisit the rest of the policy.
It is also in the preceding area talking about the naming of an area or installation of plaque, also for living deceased. So you're correct. Anywhere you wanted to change it, there are 3 spots in here that would need to be updated for.
Well, now that I see that, because I didn't see that the first time, I think maybe this committee's proposal suggested change to that paragraph should include the language. And then maybe we have a broader discussion about whether you make a change all the way through the document and take out living or deceased in the other places. Now I understand why you put that in, Jessica.
I just put it in there to mess with folks, you know.
So Jaffa, do you agree with that?
I'm sorry.
Do you agree with Parker?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's the same conversation, right? It's the same,
Okay.
it's the same thing. So you either it's something worth thinking about, or we think about it and decide it's how to handle it. It's always worth thinking about, because this is a policy especially in the current moment, especially as we're getting a new library and there are going to be things in there to name, the library itself to name. This is the moment to have that conversation. And, you know, who knows? There are a lot of threats coming, a lot of different questions to libraries and schools. So it's important to have that conversation. That's all. So whatever we decide, there's an argument for it. Whatever we decide, it's not like it would be just like out of the blue. So
Jessica, in your view, would it make sense to leave it like we have it? Not go through the rest of the policies at this point, but at the full committee meeting, if it's decided that we don't want that in there, then someone could make an amendment to also strike it elsewhere.
Yeah, so the whole goal with the consideration action process in your board meetings is to ensure that both your colleagues and the public are aware of items that might be modified or added to your policy documents or anything else. So if you all are approving forward a modified policy where all you do is you take this draft language and you swap it out for the highlighted portion, you don't change anything else. When we provide the cover letter for those policy modifications, we could include in there, you know, here are the major areas that are modified. This is when the board had the discussion. Also under consideration at the committee meeting was the language living or deceased, which is not modified in the recommended update, but is queued up for board discussion or something like that, so that your colleagues know that this is something they may want to talk about with you all. They can get additional context about what you talked about today, but that it is not actually modified in the draft that's proposed.
But I guess what I'm asking is, because of this consideration, action, so forth,
Mhm.
advertising and all that,
Mhm.
if all we do, if all we put forth is this paragraph as a consideration item, does that, and then we get to action and the board wants to knock out those words.
Yeah.
Can the board at that point also knock out anything elsewhere in the policy that hasn't gone through the consideration and action?
Yes, so the consideration action process is showing what you all recommend as a committee for the recommended update to a policy. It does not have to be accepted or rejected in full. So say you make this a consideration item in October and discussion in November. At the November meeting, you and all your colleagues will have the original document, you'll have the recommended modified document, but because they've all been publicly noticed, you can make any modifications to that policy you need that are not, you know, totally without the bounds of it. So if you added in at the November meeting, a sentence, so this is the policy regarding naming of library spaces and fixtures. If you tagged in a paragraph at the end that says, all grant dollars need to be funneled to the collection development budget specifically for kids' books, that would be out of scope for what you were looking to do here. But anything that is within the context of this policy, if it's accepting in part, in full, or none, the recommendations the policy committee has, if it is a group concurrence about taking out living or deceased, those are all totally within bounds.
Okay, so we're considering and we're taking action on the policy as a whole, not a portion of
Correct. Whole
it. Okay,
policy.
great, okay, all right. Somebody want to move that we, what, go forward as written with the addition of also. Is that right?
So moved. What Gary said.
So Jaffa,
I
second,
Kripa, I didn't hear you. Did you say yes as
Sure.
well?
No, I was asking if we're still going with living or deceased, because I'm in favor of taking those 3 words out.
oh, I didn't know you were here.
Now I stepped away for like 10 minutes, but I came back and I've been on mute, but yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So, like, like was discussed earlier, it could go either way. So if you all would like this language to have living or deceased struck through, so that that is a portion that can have board discussion, it's very clear in your policy committee, that's fine. If you opt not to do that, staff can just include a note in your cover letter that it was discussed and it's recommended for further full board discussion, but it was included in the draft that was recommended forward. So it's up to you all what you'd like to do.
Like if it were up to me, I would take those out, those 3 words out, because it seems redundant.
The issue with the redundancy really is that though it is redundant because obviously people are either living or deceased, there is a specificity of, like, when you don't say living or deceased, then that can be the axle around which the whole argument is rotated. So it's like if it's in there, or I mean, regardless, I feel like you know, if it's in there, if it's not, I mean, either way, people can bring up whomever they bring up. But if the issue is to decide whether we want to include people who are still living, right? So that's really the fundamental issue, is do we want to include people who are still living, because that can be problematic. That's really the issue. So if you don't have it in there, then people can say, well, why not? You know, you said people and it's people, but if you have it in there, then it makes it, I mean, it's just, that's the discussion point, whether or not it's worth considering that, just to potentially avoid future issues.
Okay.
And I guess here's where I come down on it. Like, either we should include it in the revised paragraph, or we should leave it out and then take it out of the other 2 paragraphs. Like, one or the other is kind of what I would suggest.
I still like the latter one better.
And if we do that, I mean, we would just, again, have a discussion among the full board as to whether it should be out or in. So I don't feel strongly about either one. I do think it's redundant, so I'm fine either way.
Very,
I'm in favor of striking that phrase out in all 3 paragraphs personally.
Karen?
So we would strike it out, and when it's presented to the board, we say the reason is because it's redundant.
That is my stance.
Jaffa? The thing is, if the committee strikes it out and says it's redundant, it'd be pretty hard for the full board to say we want to put it in just in order to make sure that the issue is before any future board when they take action. Maybe I didn't say that right. When I kind of flippantly said that you probably wouldn't have brought it up if it hadn't been there. And in your case, I guess that wasn't true, but I think that'd be true of most people. When they first read this, and those words weren't there, they wouldn't have thought of that issue that you brought up. And that's why you want it there.
The thing is that, yes, the reason that me would have noticed is because I have been involved in renaming,
Right.
seeing this in recent years, and seeing this specific issue be brought up. So that is, of course, not just me. There are many people who are involved in this kind of thing who would notice because of recent involvement with renaming. And that is why I brought it up, as a question, because I do know that it does get on people's minds, and people do use that as a wedge issue or as an argument in their against or for something. And and if it's one way, again, it's not like I'm saying one way is better or worse. I just don't like the idea of boards being blindsided or staff being blindsided and not having had a robust discussion around it. So you have rationale beyond just redundancy, because it is not just redundant. There actually is meaning to those words that has huge emotional impact in the conversation. It's not redundant like redundant. It has actual, though it is redundant, it does have actual weight in the conversation,
I guess the question I'm asking, or the point I'm trying to make is, if we as a committee take that out everywhere, then when we go to the board, you're going to have to bring it up and argue that it should be in there.
I agree.
Okay.
Out of the blue.
Okay.
Out of the blue, right? I mean, like, it wouldn't have, why are you even bringing this up, right? Like,
Yeah.
out of the blue, and I'm really would not be bringing it up out of the blue. And also it kind of, like you said, it does make a full board who they may not have been involved in this. It may not be in any of their minds, right? So, it makes it harder for them. Like you said, we were a polite bunch, so it would be unlikely for them to want to bring it up if we as a committee struck it out. Yes, I agree with that completely. So I don't know, I think it's a worthy conversation because it actually does come up.
When we vote, I think I'd be inclined to vote with Sujata for that reason.
Would you say?
I would be inclined to vote with you for that reason. Because it would put the onus then on the board to make the decision and strike it.
And really, I'm not arguing in favor of its being there or not. I'm just thinking that we should have thought about it. It shouldn't be, I don't think that it should be struck out without having thought about why it's being struck out, because those words actually do have meaning in this context. That's all.
I'm just saying that I agree with you. So. What do we want to do? Put it to vote or?
So the vote that you all had previously on the table was just about adding the modified, fully highlighted paragraph. So that one is good to go. So if you all would like to do a second vote on whether or not you want to include the words living or deceased in 3 separate areas of this policy, then that can finalize if this will be moved forward to the full board with or without those included.
Okay, so we've voted on adding also, right? Or we agreed. So that's it.
Say that one more time.
Also, the word also,
Yes.
we've agreed to that.
Yes, that one is in there.
It's fine.
Okay. All right, then. Because living or deceased is already there, I guess. Probably you would need to make a motion, we strike that in each paragraph that it, well, it would strike it in the proposed substitute and in the existing paragraphs 2 and 3.
So moved.
Second? Hearing none, I guess we would proceed to voting then on the draft as amended with also. We already have a motion and a second on that, right?
Mhm.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 I,
Okay, opposed? Okay, I didn't hear either of the vote is 3 and 1 present or 3-1, I'm not sure.
I heard an aye from you, Gary, an aye from Sujatha. I heard an aye from Parker. Provided in pictures, I'm sorry.
Sure, yeah, pass it.
Aye.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Does that complete our business, Jessica?
It,
Oh, it's at the next meeting. I don't think we need to set one, do we?
no, staff included that on there in case you were not able to come to a full decision or discussion at the end of today's meeting. So you do not need to send your name.
Okay. Well, I thank everyone for their input and their motion to adjourn.
I'll move.
Second.
Thank you. So
see you all in a couple of weeks.